We got a race week upon us. It feels like it's been forever, and it has. And we're going to be joined by Team Principal of Williams, James Vowles, just a little bit later on in the show, Tim, which was a great poll. Great guest bookings, Tim. I just want to give Tim all the credit for that. Not easy to get those things, but Tim gets it done.
Yeah, no, I got a good relationship with James and Mike Crack and a lot of the people we get on the show and stuff. So,
yeah. I was thrilled at the comments, the feedback from the Mike Crack interview. I think a lot of people were surprised at just how charming he is.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when you don't get introduced to somebody on Drive to Survive, you have the tendency to think that they're a bit mechanical or something like that. But Mike's super warm and humble, and you can sort of tell he's brilliant behind the. There's a lot going on upstairs.
Yeah, I think he's more like, it's funny, like when we take a look at, team principals now, Adam, like, you've got the likes of like Andreas Stella, for instance, who's, very like engineering mind. Not to say that Mike isn't, because he is, but the team principals now, they tend to really listen to the drivers, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, of course.
And they really take on board what the drivers have to say. And I feel like Mike is one of those team principals. It's like he's like a driver's team principal.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Likes
it's like a player's coach.
Yes. Yeah. Well, what's that story? I think it's in the movie Rush as well. But where Nicky Lauda's like, this transmission's terrible, and they're like, what? It's a Ferrari, and he's like, it's a tractor, it's terrible. And
you call it a shit box.
Yeah, shit box. That's what it is. Isn't that funny? Right? Like you kind of think about that now. And, all these teams want drivers because of their feedback.
Yeah.
They like that.
Yeah.
And
it's so important too, right, Adam? I mean, like, because they're the ones who are in the car. And I think of a sport that's so dominated by data sometimes that, like, that can overshadow what the driver's trying to tell you.
Sure.
And I think, like, some teams really have problems with that. Like, I think some teams really they dig too much into the data and they don't necessarily take on board what the driver is saying. Mm-hmm. As weird as that sounds, I mean, that does happen. And, that's why you see teams like really start to go backwards.
You've seen data really take over. I mean, Formula One's always been a data sport. I think dating back to like the 50s, when back then it was like, I just know a guy who can wrench better than the next guy, right? But, there always has been a huge mathematical component to it. But you've seen it across sports where analytics have come in and they become very popular, starting with, I would say, the whole Billy Bean Oakland Athletics thing. You've seen it happen in hockey. You've seen it happen in basketball. You've seen it happen in football. Baseball is obviously another big math sport. I think what's happened, Tim, is you're right. You get people who are brilliant in, and the tendency is to think the tool is the result. Mm-hmm. When in actuality, the analytics are just a part of it. Mm-hmm. And how the driver drives is a part of it, and how that all blends in together. And Mike seems like that kind of a guy. James, we're going to talk to about Carlos Sainz. We're going to talk to about Franco Colapinto. We're going to talk to about Alex Albon, and obviously all the interesting, fun stuff that surrounds Williams. But first, I want to do a little bit of news here because we do have a race week coming up, and there's been a few things that I think are notable. And I want to start with motorsport, talking about what are the three valuable battlegrounds left to play for in 2024. And for me, as a fan, I look at that and go, here are my reasons to watch. Right. Here's why I'm interested. And I think the first thing, the obvious thing, is Lando and Max. So they didn't even mention that. Right? Lando and Max is, for the Drivers' Championship, if we get down to the last race of the year and, Lando's within striking distance of Max, it's going to be can't miss. It's going to be outstanding, kind of like what Lewis and Max was, right?
Yeah, box office.
Hopefully handled better.
Yeah.
Hopefully handled better. But Tim, I want to get your thoughts on the first one. So here's the first one, and this is team related. The battle for first and second. And the contenders are McLaren, Red Bull, and Ferrari. Now, when you look at this battle, because they're framing it as a three-piece battle, we've seen most media handle this as a two-piece. Mm-hmm. It's Red Bull, it's McLaren, mm-hmm. And it's been Red Bull most of the year. McLaren came on 6-7 races in and has started dominating. Why Ferrari in there?
Well, I think it's because they've made such progress. And I think like where they started at the beginning of the season, Adam, I mean, they obviously had a really good start to the season. I mean, it wasn't spectacular, but I mean, they were the closest team to Red Bull straight off the hop. I haven't read the article yet, so I'm interested to hear what the other two are, because like when I think about it, I'm just like, I wonder if this one is in there, and we'll see if it is, but we'll wait and see. But regardless of that, I mean, the battle for constructors championship between those three teams, I think it is important to watch. I mean, there's a ton of money behind this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's millions and millions that's up for grabs. Like, and if you're and if you're falling behind at any point and you've projected yourself to, let's say Ferrari's like projected themselves at the beginning of the year that they felt that they were going to finish second, and then they plan their capital expenditures, they plan what they spend on the car, they plan, and obviously there's a budget cap that goes with that as well. They plan like marketing materials, they plan what they're going to pay people. They have Lewis coming in as well, so they need money for that at the same time. So they're planning like, okay, if we finish second, which we project we will, and I'm not saying that's what Ferrari said, I'm just giving you an example of why it's so important. That kind of covers their a bit of that capital expenditure. You know what I mean? Like you're going to get like whatever it is, like a couple $100 million, like $100 million plus. Sure. Ferrari gets like their special bonus. Or let's say you're Red Bull and you planned to win the Constructors' Championship, but at the moment, like you're maybe projecting yourself to end up in third. It's kind of like, okay, well, where are you going to get the rest of the money to make up the difference for what you would plan for? So I think there's a bit of that these teams really have to fight for, and that to me makes the battle for constructors really interesting. There are fans who are just fans of teams, right? And there are fans that are fans of drivers, and there are fans that are just fans of the sport, fans of good racing. And I would say that when you look at this from like a really aerial view, and you see all of the things that go on behind the scenes, but then you hear about all the stories that go on behind the scenes, and then you boil it down to what are the drivers doing, and you boil it down to what are the teams doing, and there is so much competition that happens in the story behind the story behind the story that it's like, it's fascinating to see, for me anyways, where these teams stack up. Because when you take a look at Red Bull and where they had started, and then all the turmoil that happened there, and then all the turmoil with the drivers that's still ongoing, and then also all the turmoil with like Helmut Marko and Christian Horner, and then you take a look at the team and the regression, not the progression, right? And it's that little story within. It's kind of like, it's almost a team that's really starting to melt down internally, that's playing out in real time for us to watch. And you see that dip in performance, and then you see the dip in the constructors' standings. And then you see a team like Ferrari where, they started off really well. They had a big dip, but then they fought back. Right. And now they're fighting back to the point that where they can actually, they could battle McLaren for the Constructors' Championship lead, which is, to me, extremely exciting, because then that catapults them up into next season as to, like, Adam, where are they going to finish next year because they won the constructors or whatever, right? So that to me is what makes the Constructors' Championship just so exciting and so fascinating to watch.
Well, and Tim, I think you make a really good point there. It's about that excitement of, you just have no idea what's going to happen, which is a cool thing. Can I offer another side piece, that something that, if you're an F1 fan, you should be interested in, I think. At least if you're hardcore enough to be listening to an F1 podcast about it. I always find it funny. A lot was made about what Ferrari paid Lewis Hamilton, or is going to pay Lewis Hamilton over the next couple of years. When the announcement came out, Ferrari stock went up so much that the expectation is that Ferrari paid for Lewis Hamilton day one, just in stock value. Asset value, they have it. It's already done. He's already worth the investment. And that's not counting him, what he does in the car, how many T-shirts he sells, how many appearances, whatever else you want to mention on that. He brings a lot to the team, a lot. Oh, yeah. Any one of these teams has a massive market value placed on where they're finishing, because I look at a team like McLaren, and you look at their business model. You get a lot of people in the luxury car market, and McLaren's a luxury car, complaining about brands like Mercedes and Ferrari, because to get, or even Porsche, to get to a specific level of, whatever Ferrari you're looking for, you have to have owned 5 Ferraris before that. There's the whole G-Wagon thing, right? With Mercedes, it's like you can't buy a new G-Wagon unless you own an old G-Wagon, which means that you have to buy a used G-Wagon, and that's what props their prices up. Same thing with Ferrari. You can't just walk into the dealership and buy a new Ferrari. You have to own one.
Yes.
And that means you got to buy used. McLaren doesn't do any of that. And McLaren believes that their way in the car segment is to give people what they want. Obviously, you have to develop if you want a P1, which is like $1 million car, you're going to need, you're going to need some connections. You probably will have to have bought a couple of McLarens, but they're not going to stop you from speccing a $700,000 McLaren the way they would a $700,000 Ferrari. All of this sounds ridiculous, and it's understandable that it does, because we're talking about ridiculous sums of money. But McLaren is in this, and they launched the auto part of their brand because of the race team.
Yes.
And because they wanted to, they were like, oh, there's a great opportunity here to sell cars. And you look at the response to Aston Martin for the brief blip that they were good last season, right? They had 10, 12 races where they were one of the more dominant cars, and they sold out. Is it Vantage or Vanquish? One of the two, whatever the begins with a V.
Yeah, they'd done well with sales on a couple of models. Yeah, big time.
Killed it.
Yeah.
So Ferrari sales are going to matter because of this, although Ferrari is always Ferrari.
Yep.
Red Bull Global, their marketing efforts are going to matter on this, and McLaren sales are going to matter on this as well.
Big time.
So it's just something to keep in mind, but I think it's always kind of fun to think about that.
And I think that's an interesting point that you make about McLaren too, there, Adam, because that's a team that really struggled to sell cars. They did. I thought at one point that was all going to be packed in, like especially during the pandemic.
Yep.
Like I really didn't think that not even the car brand side of McLaren was going to make it. But then once you start, sprinkling in all of this marketing that comes with Formula One and the winning and a potential chance at winning a constructors championship, then I wouldn't be surprised if we started to see like the amount at which they actually sell product, like car product. Yeah,
they're going to see it. They'll see the stock price, and and by the way, you're smarter to spend $300,000 on McLaren stock than you are on a car. But all of us, you can't drive stock. You know what I'm saying? So,
no, good point. Good point.
Something else I want to mention: the battle for 6th place is something that motorsport brings up, and we had to focus on these battles a lot more last year, Tim, because Red Bull was just so dominant.
Yeah.
But V-Carb and Haas have a pretty tight little battle for 6th place.
This is the one I was thinking about.
V-Carb and Haas, and you know what? For Haas especially. Without the mega financial backing, by the way, we've got more news on Haas to talk about later.
Yeah.
That is going to be, the fact that they're in the running for 6th place is amazing.
Yeah.
And so what does, Tim, for anybody that's newer to the sport, why are we not laughing at this? Like in the NHL, in the NFL, if we're talking about teams that are mid-pack teams, we're talking about teams that are on the fringe of the playoffs, nobody cares.
Yeah.
Why is it in Formula One this matters so much?
I mean, obviously because of the money, right? The money that comes with it. But then also,
what kind of money are you making 6th and 7th place?
It changes like every year, right? Like we don't know. There's probably going to be over $1 billion that's going to be up for grabs,
for prize money.
Prize money.
Wow.
And that's going to that'll be distributed throughout the 10 teams. But like the higher up you go, the more money you kind of make back in return. And for a team like Haas, they do need that money, right? It's really important to them to get that money. So I think for them, the interesting fact is, once Gunther Steiner had, his contract didn't get renewed, he wasn't going to be back at Haas. At that point, I thought, man, it's going to be really hard for Io Komatsu to get this team up off the ground, off its knees, and actually like fighting in this championship at some points and in some races, because I really thought they were going to struggle. Like I really did. I didn't know what Io Komatsu was going to do simply because he's never been in this position before.
Yeah.
And the way that he ended up structuring the upgrades, the way that he structured how he wanted them brought to the car, getting the drivers, especially Nico Hülkenberg, in the right frame of mind, to go out and get the job done, being team players. Like Kevin Magnussen was a pretty big team player at some of these races. Not too sure about the Dutch Grand Prix, but I think I've already spoken on that
Yes,
one before. But
you have.
Yeah, but like other ones, like the race in Saudi Arabia, I thought he was pretty crucial there to help Nico Hulkenberg to score a point. So yeah, I mean that's been interesting. I think also RB as well, because those two teams were two of the worst teams in Formula One last season.
Yes,
and to see them actually, Adam, take that sort of jump, I mean, it's been pretty remarkable, because when you're taking a look at they're fighting against Alpine. That's a team they have money, they have resources, right? They just do. I mean, Haas is getting their parts from all over the friggin' map. Like, they don't have a central station where they're just getting their parts, right?
Right.
And then also on top of all that, I would also factor in Williams as well, because since they brought that upgrade, they've looked to the Dutch Grand Prix. They've looked really good. They had a really rocky start to the season.
They really did.
Yeah, like you and I have spoken about. But I really think that they could actually factor in, if they keep scoring P7s, P8s, that kind of thing. And Franco Colapinto's we talked to James about this guy, and the things that James says about him. I mean, there's no reason why they can't score more points, for the rest of this season and start to play maybe a factor within that sixth place in the Constructors' Championship standings.
And Tim, once they figure out balance generally on that car.
Yeah,
that car is fast in a straight line.
Yeah, big time. Yeah.
That's the problem with most cars, is they're not fast. That car's fast. Just need to figure out how to get through those corners a little bit better.
Yep.
The last thing, and again, something we had to focus on a lot last year, but perhaps less this year. We've given time to the backfield. Williams, Alpine, and Sauber, the battle for 8th. Now, I found it interesting that Motorsport included Williams in this, because they also included them, or we would have included them for 6th. But for 8th place, Williams, Sauber, Alpine, Alpine to have fallen this far, Williams to have had the bad start that they were recovering from, and Sauber, who really have just been horrific the whole year.
They've been terrible.
They've been terrible. So
They haven't even scored a point.
So how much of a battle is it really? I don't think Sauber's really in it. If it's between Alpine and Williams, Tim, do you have a favorite? Do you not that James is coming on later, but we have, full disclosure, pre-recorded the interview, so you don't have to say anything.
No, I would say Williams, because of the state that Alpine is in. I mean, some weekends they're really strong. Some tracks we go to, it really favors them, and they can be quite impressive, but then there are sometimes there are tracks that they go to and they're dead last, and they're fighting for 16th, 17th, 18th place, or qualifying in that position as well. And then some weekends we've seen Pierre Gasly put one together. We've seen Esteban Ocon put one together, and it's just been, those weekends are extremely impressive. I just don't know if there's many of those weekends left for them that are coming up. I mean, Vegas might be a good weekend for them.
Yep.
Maybe Brazil, maybe, but I would say, since that Williams upgrade came at the Dutch Grand Prix, I would still say their car's looking way better than the other two that are behind them, of Alpine and Sauber.
Yeah, way better.
Yeah,
way better. I mean, Sauber's best news all year is that they replaced their tire guns. It's been
bad, man.
Yeah, and so I read a little bit of news, and we'll move off into this because we got a couple minutes before we're going to bring James on here. I know that Mattia Binotto had a lot of experience with Mick Schumacher in the Ferrari Junior program while Mattia was at Ferrari. Mm-hmm. Schumacher's name again has popped up as a potential sleeper for that Sauber seat. And you know what, Tim? What I'm noticing is Schumacher's name tends to come up with every team for every seat. And I think there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is he's got good people around him. Mm-hmm. How serious do you really think Mick Schumacher is in that particular sweepstakes?
Yeah, I don't. I really, okay. I don't.
Because that doesn't make any sense to me either.
I mean, look, nothing against Mick. We've talked about him quite a bit on this show. And look, I think I'm still going to stick by Valtteri Bottas for that seat for next year. It's the only one that makes a lot of sense. It's you're basically dealing with one of the most experienced drivers on the grid. He's well accomplished. You can't say that he isn't. And he just knows how to work with a team. Like, he just does. It's not his fault that Sauber's really dropped the ball on the car this year. Like, they really have. Like, it's been very disappointing to watch what, they've actually done with that car, because there's a lot of men and women at that team working at the track, busting their ass every weekend on this car. And like, for them to not see big upgrades and have a little bit of success, I mean, it's very disappointing. And the drivers, both Zhou Guanyu and Valtteri Bottas, have been driving really well with a car that is like a handful. So,
yes,
big props to them as well, and everyone who works, trackside at that team. Are they going to score a point this season? I mean, you could flip a coin on that one.
Yeah, no kidding.
Like, you're really good.
How many people would have to have engine failure, I think, is my question.
I mean,
is it in a sprint race, or is it the real race? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly, right.
So,
but Valtteri's put that car into some pretty impressive positions where you just didn't really think like, oh, Valtteri Bottas is running P9 right now, and you're just like, how the hell? And you're just like, you have to think about that for a second. A couple things just didn't go his way in a few races, and finishes P11 or 12, and just finishes outside the points. So that just shows me that, I mean, that's a driver who is really operating at a very, very high level to get a car that is that bad, that high up the grid.
And I think when you've got a new program, it makes sense to have veteran drivers too.
Sure.
Like Hülkenberg
100%.
and Bottas have been known for years as great qualifiers. And for a team that's looking to at least jump into the conversation of the mid-pack next year, right? They don't want to be last again. They might be, but they don't want to be. You're going to need guys who are good qualifiers. Hülkenberg and Bottas are. It's the only chance they have.
I even think like Mattia Binotto even said it, like trying to get this team into a winning position in the years to come. He said it was like climbing. I'm paraphrasing here, but it was like, I think I read it that it was like climbing Mount Everest or something like that. Like,
I'm not surprised.
Extremely hard.
Yeah. So Tim, we'll I want to quickly ask you about the Haas Toyota partnership. This was a major announcement. Then we're going to talk to James Vowles.
I think we had it on our show, and then I got Hayden to remove it.
Yes.
I didn't want to let the cat out of the bag and get in trouble on that one.
That's right. So okay, very quickly in a couple of minutes here, what does Haas get out of this? And we know Toyota gets branding, but what do they get?
I think for Haas, like, it's support. For sure, like, especially on the technical side, like, I think what this could eventually end up becoming is Toyota makes the car. That's what I think. Like, I think that's what this relationship could evolve into. Toyota, I mean, obviously they're going to get that brand exposure. That's going to be extremely important to them. Haas is going to get a brand new simulator. They need it, right? They're going to get, I think, a little more help in that driver development sort of system to actually help them with that. I think a big thing is like even searching for the next like Japanese driver is going to be, like really, really impressive. I mean, we've seen a lot of impressive Japanese drivers really compete lately. Like, they've been awesome. And so, I would say like there's stuff like that as well. But like technically, I think that's probably one of the most important parts of this relationship, really understanding the car, what they have, utilizing what Toyota's technology is. I mean, they still have their old Formula One factory that they use for their World Endurance Championship program, Adam. Like, out in, I believe it's in Cologne, because that's where their wind tunnel is. And so like they've got a lot of resources that they can help Haas with, because at the moment, like we had said, like Haas has taken these little bits and pieces from like all over the world and kind of like putting them together like Lego. And it's like, you gotta get serious with this because the team's really performing well. Io Komatsu has done an incredible job with them to get them back up and running and really punching above their weight. And the two drivers as well. I mean, Hülkenberg in particular has been very impressive this season. But I think that's probably one of the biggest things. I mean, they've said it that, basically having a good technical partnership with a company like Toyota is very important to them. And this is something that's been in the works for quite a while. Adam, you actually were the first one to bring it up on the podcast. It was back in, I want to say it was like July or August. Sandor Mazeros, who is a buddy of mine, he's a journalist. He works in the F1 paddock. He's the original guy who kind of got this story going and out there. And then I kind of found out about it being like, signed, sealed, and delivered just a couple weeks ago. So it's cool. It's cool to see Toyota come back. I like it.
It's major. It's major. Yeah. It's great to see them back in the sport. Okay, so why don't we take this time and we will throw to James Vowles, and then on Thursday we're gonna have another show, Tim. Look at that. Race week, baby. Let's go.
Adam, I got a lot of travel coming up. It's really exciting. I'm looking forward to it. And we also have a special guest coming on for this Thursday coming. Mm-hmm. So we won't ruin it, but just want to let everybody know we got someone cool coming on as well. Not to say that our other guests are cool. No.
Listen, we're just continuing the cool. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's it. There you go. That's better.
All right. Hey, so let's have a chat with James Vowles, team principal of Williams. Joining us for the first time on Nailing the Apex is James Vowles, team principal at Williams. James, thank you so much for making time for us today in our show. What's the schedule like for you today? We've just been kind of hanging around, having a nice morning. I'm sure that yours has been the same. No meetings, nothing to do, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, first of all, thank you for having me on. Absolute pleasure joining you. Day pretty busy on this one. So this is an interesting part of our year where we have a couple of weekends. I think it's 3 weekends without a race in it, which is unusual. Mm-hmm. But I can assure you it's been filled. I have very efficient EAs who fill it from start to finish to make sure that all my time's being used. All enjoyable though.
James, thanks again for doing this. We really appreciate it. Wanted to get you on to talk to you about Carlos Sainz first. I remember we were discussing about Carlos when you had signed him and had made the announcement that you had been speaking with him since, I guess it was Abu Dhabi 2023. How did you get to that point where you knew that, Carlos was the driver that you wanted in your car, immediately? How did you get to that point?
So I was only speaking to Carlos and his family back then, no one else. And pretty much throughout the whole process, that was the only individual I was talking to as well. And what drove me towards him is this. First and foremost, there was some under pressure, which includes Singapore last year. You can see he just boxes clever. He's a fast driver, but there's plenty of fast drivers, but he's a very fast driver. But it's more, he has the capability under pressure to perform at a very high level. So that was number one. I'm looking for an individual that really at the highest level of performance is able to deal with the pressure around them and want more of it. But the real drive was this. Every team that he's been in, he's been up against Lando, which you can see at the moment. Lando could be fighting for a world championship, drivers' championship. He's been up against Charles, who is very, very quick on his day. He's been up against Max. He's been up against some of the best names in the sport if I asked you to list your sort of top 3 or 4. And every time against them, he's held his own for the most part. And that's the important part, or beaten them. Next, the teams that he's been in have moved forward on the grid. And that was probably the most important point to me. It doesn't happen by chance. That happens because the more I got to know him, the more I realized he's a leader and he's performance driven. He just wants the team to move forward, and he does things in a constructive way. It isn't, this needs to be better. It is, what can we do in order to move together forward up the grid? He is a leader in every regard, and it fit perfectly in with where we are as Williams and where I want us to be as Williams.
James, one of the things that I think has been very interesting and heartening to watch as you've taken over at Williams is there's a change in philosophy. There is a belief, and it starts with you. Every interview we see you in, whether it's a short one on like Sky Sports after the race, or if it's a longer form podcast like this one, there seems to be a desire to I don't want to say live up to the past, but to create a new future where championships are a regular thing again. And I'm just curious for you. And Carlos fitting into that. Do you see Carlos as a world championship driver?
Short answer, yes. I see Carlos and Alex as the ability to fight for world championships. Alex has changed a lot since he was at Red Bull. He's a very different human being today. So yes, in the short answer to that, So winning a world championship is first and foremost about making sure that you have a team working together, pointing the right way. You're not fighting each other, you're fighting the world outside of the building. And one of the reasons why someone said, have you got the best driver line on the grid? And I didn't hesitate and said yes. They're performant and they're quick. That's a given. But there's no politics between them. They both want the team to be successful, which means they'll be pushing the team forward rather than fighting against each other. And that's a very different dynamic when you start a team, creating that. And what it means is we have the best possibility of creating the platform for them where we can move up to start fighting for championships. Now, have no doubt, when you're fighting for a championship, and you'll see this time and time again, that is hard to maintain as a structure. But I think I have the two drivers where it's entirely possible to maintain. But the reason for really drawing a line underneath it and showing a lineup of the quality that we have is because I want the world to recognize and realize this is a different Williams. This is a Williams that is serious about fighting its way to the top.
When you make that announcement, like inside the factory to the team, and you see the reaction from, all the employees and everyone who works at Williams, like what was that like when you let them know that you guys had Carlos Sainz come into the team for next season?
It's the way we did it is we put up a TV screen in the race area. So where we're building the cars in the winter period and sometimes in the European period. And you can fit about sort of 600, 700 people in there. With shift changes, you don't have everyone in the building at the same time. So it was everyone just crammed into this small space. And we had Carlos pre-record a message that we played up on the screen. And all I did is introduce it and said, I have some news, but probably best I let this person tell you instead. And at the moment where we push play, I couldn't hear anything for about the next hour because the screams were incredible. There was people who were tearful. There was people screaming. The video was about 1:30 long. I don't think anyone heard anything of it because they were just screaming away for that entire period of time. And my only one regret, you can't do this, is that I wish I could have bottled that moment and kept it forever because it was so special. You'll rarely see an emotional release in that many people in that time frame. But that's what it was. It was an incredible moment for the team.
Tim, do you mind if I ask about Franco Colapinto?
Yeah, for sure.
So, James, one of the things that's been an amazing surprise, I think, for you guys is the performance of Franco Colapinto since he's jumped into the car. And I think what's so interesting and amazing about the sport, and I'll be up front, I'm not a driver. Tim's driven. I can barely drive a stick shift, but I love Formula One. And so as a fan, I constantly, you watch the media reports and you see the hype of drivers coming. You see them up through F3 and F2 and they arrive and sometimes it goes well. A lot of the times it doesn't because Formula One is so sink or swim. Could you have ever been prepared for how well Franco has done just jumping into the car mid-season like this?
So first and foremost, don't worry. Formula One cars, once you get off from the hand clutch, you'll be fine. You just pull the pedals, just up and down. So you're going to be fine in that. So there's a reason why we put Franco in the car. The surprise wasn't when we put him in the car in Monza or Baku. The surprise was actually when we put him in the car in Silverstone. Now, he'd been progressing really well through his Formula 2 career and made big strides, won in Imola in really difficult circumstances. He really was, both in our simulator as well, he's done thousands and thousands of kilometers developing the car that we have today. And you can see a maturity change and a positional change across the period of 24. And it was in reward for the targets that he was accomplishing in the simulator, but also what he was doing in Formula 2 that we gave him the opportunity to drive in Silverstone. And Silverstone is a hard track to learn for the first time. I mean, for those that don't know the track, it's one of the fastest on the calendar. You've got a series of corners. By the way, good circuits, you use corner names, not numbers.
That's right.
So in Silverstone, I'll always refer to it by names, but you go through something called Beckett's Church, which is a series of high-speed corners. You're entering in there at about 280 kilometers an hour, where you just scrub the speed off every time you turn left and right, and the car's right on the limit. When you've got it properly positioned, it's just rotating around the CFG every time. It's brilliant to watch the cars. If you stood by the side of it, which you can do there, and watch them, you think there's no way that car is coming around this corner, and it surprises you every time. He was near enough on the money the first few laps through there, and that's surprising. But that's not where you adjudicate actually a driver. The way you adjudicate them is how are they on the braking, slow speed, transition, getting the car rotated, because that's the easy place to throw away a tenth or two. And that's where he was absolutely on the money straight away. And that's what caught me off guard a little bit. I thought, that's better than I had anticipated for you. It was more reward for the step you'd made. But that was exciting, interesting. So we developed the programs further in the background with what we were doing with him, such that if we made a change, we were in a position to be ready. In Monza, I expected him to be within a few tenths of Alex immediately, and then expected him to make big chunks of improvement over the next few races. My surprise was more that when we got to Baku, and not the initial laps, but after he made a mistake and hit the wall, I was expecting him to hit the wall at some point. You have to understand that some of the only ways you can find your limits is by making those mistakes, and they stay with you forever. It was the next session he ended up within 4 milliseconds of Alex. You wouldn't have known that he's had a reset, that he's dropped backwards. And for a driver, and Tim hopefully will be able to talk to this as well, to compartmentalize what has happened, put it in a box, put it behind you, and then keep pushing forward is one of the hardest things that you can do. And he does it very naturally. And so, again, I was caught out by how quickly he got there, but not by his pace. His raw pace has always been astonishing. All the way through his career, it's been quick. It's just more hidden than most of the other drivers coming up, because the sequence that he had to take to come here was one where he went wherever there was money to pay for him to drive.
Wow.
You've got a lot to come from Franco, and I'm really excited by what his future is.
And just seeing how impressive he's been, considering, the last few races, he's been on street circuits in a Formula One car, which is, I mean, I can't even imagine some of your first times in an F1 car and you're on a street circuit like Baku or Singapore. After he had the incident in free practice 1 in Azerbaijan, did you say anything to him after that, or was it like you were confident enough to know that he was going to get out of the car, put that behind him, and go out and be competitive?
No, we had a discussion, but not about not pushing as much. What I spoke to him about is said, what happened? Just go into the detail. What happened? We went through it. He said, I took a little bit more entry than I did before. There's a little bit of dust there, and I carried around 3 kilometers an hour more into the corner. I said, yep, it's both of those two things, and you can get away with one, but actually it initiated from the corner before, which is what we spent some time talking through. There's a little bit of rear wheel slip on the corner before. This is how Formula One is. You've got to be ever so careful, but the consequence of what you do one corner before is what adds to it. And so he could have got away with the corner before and carrying the same speed into the corner, or the corner before not having the wheel slip and carrying a little bit more speed in, but all three you can't do. And the real key for me is making sure that he compartmentalized exactly what happened in that corner, because that learning will be invaluable for the rest of his career, simple as that. But it was never about anything more than, now that you know that, how do you modulate given the corner before? What do you do going into the corner afterwards? And it was basically the learning loop that I wanted him to go through. And he did brilliantly well with that. He really showed all the characteristics that you're looking for. There's an interesting element where some of the best drivers in the world, it's not that they're particularly faster to a corner than anyone else. It's the ability to compartmentalize what has happened within a second from the previous corner and apply that knowledge to what's happening in the future sequence of corners. And that was more than making sure that he spent some time consuming and thinking about. My answer back to him was, because he came in apologizing, my answer back to him was that just as long as you're using this learning experience for something that builds you into one of the best drivers in the world, it's been worth every second of it.
Wow. That's reassuring from a boss. That's especially in your first few weeks on the job. I love that. James, one of the things that we've seen recently, along with the revival of the Williams brand, is the revival of Alex Albon, who had, for all intents and purposes, a tough go when he was at the Red Bull team next to Max. Although he had great performances there too, the talent was clearly already there. What I see is a young man who's turned into a man and is a leader now. And you've been there to witness that transition. And I'm kind of curious, as somebody who is so process driven as you are, what are your thoughts on how that came about and how Alex has really stepped into his own as a driver and as a teammate off the track?
Drived it really well. The Alex I sort of came across in 2016, which was the first time. And then the beginning of 2023 is entirely different to the Alex that's there today. And that's a great thing. I think it's hard in your career if you've been pushed down several times and had a difficult start to things. He had a lot of growing up to do fundamentally and making sure he established himself for who he was, not anything more than that. The way you deal with it is the way you deal with anyone within an organization, in my opinion. Drivers are no different. They need the support and belief of the team around them, and they need the backing of the management. And all of that was provided to him. I wanted him to make sure that I have his back. I want him by my side as we move this team forward. From the first day, near enough, in fact, it was before I officially started, we had dinner together where I went through this exact conversation with him and making sure he's aware that this is what it looks like in our future. This is where you are, and this is why I believe in you. And I think it created a good platform for him to really let go of some of the insecurities perhaps that he may have had and focus on how do I deliver the most for this team. This isn't now about 1 year. I don't need to be proving myself in that. How do I build myself and this team into a place of success for the future? And what is brilliant with Alex is in qualifying, this is hard to do. He will do lap after lap at the time we need him to, building up on each one, but enough that every time it puts you into the right position for where the car can achieve in qualifying 1, 2, and 3. He doesn't put a foot wrong, but he is on the limit of the car. And that's unusual. The pressure that falls on your shoulders where you've got 1 lap to deliver it is enormous. And he gets pretty much every time out of it what I would have expected or what I would have hoped the car can achieve. It's the same in the race. You put him under immense pressure, and that includes world champions behind you, and he just deals with it in his stride. His elbows are out. You're not going to get past Alex, and I love that about him.
Best defense in the sport. Best defense in the sport. Unbelievable. Sorry, Tim, go ahead.
Last one for you, James, because I know you got to get running, so I'll make it quick. Just wanted to ask you about Franco Colapinto for next season, and where do you see him? I know you've said that he does deserve a place on the F1 grid. There is an open seat down at Sauber. Is that something you're pushing for him to get, or do you see him coming back to Formula 2, or where do you see him?
So first and foremost, I think he's already demonstrated and shown that he earns his place and earns his place into Formula 1. I'd say this driver market for the last 12 months has been unpredictable. You wouldn't have been able to predict it. I definitely haven't predicted it. So what's the next 12 months? Because I don't think the show's over in that regard. And so someone of the caliber and opportunity that Franco has in front of him, he can make his own pathway to a certain extent. He needs to keep moving forward, keep improving, keep stepping up. An opportunity will appear. If it doesn't, what I can assure everyone on is we will have the best reserve driver on the grid that we'll make sure is doing the right amount of preparation in the background to keep him in the right position for when opportunity does appear our way. As you mentioned, there's still open seats in the grid. It's hard to really say anything in that regard. That's their decision to make. I think Franco would be a perfect fit. But irrespective, he's part of the Williams family and we have a responsibility to make sure we look after him.
Wow, I love that. James, we really appreciate your time. We know how busy you are, and your insights today have been fantastic, and we do hope you'll come back.
Yeah, thanks again, James.
Very kind. Thank you to both of you. It's been a pleasure.